Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Physics 12. During this course, we're going to use models, often mathematical, to help us understand a particular set of phenomena. But as I mentioned last year, Owen, I need to point out that this year, almost everything that I teach you is going to be wrong. There is no such thing as the normal force. Doesn't exist. Doesn't. It's not a real force. In fact, Elias, I'll go one step further. Most physicists would say gravity is not a force. It's a curvature of space-time. There is no such thing as the force of gravity. There's only three forces: electromagnetism, the strong force, and the weak force. And anything that I've taught you are combinations of those. We just never bothered diving down to that. I mean, but you've been learning models your whole school career. As an example, Elias, in grade 9 or grade 10, you were taught that an atom can be thought of as a nucleus with little electrons spinning around it. Well, that's a model, because this is not what an atom looks like. Electrons are not little tiny dots that circle around a nucleus. But if we allow that as a model, it explains a lot about how the periodic table is laid out and how chemicals can combine, even though that's not quite what's going on when you dive down. So as we did last year, we're going to ignore air resistance frequently. We'll ignore friction. We'll be close. We'll be close. Since our models will be mathematical, good math skills help. So one of the first things you want to be good at is solving a quadratic equation. What's a quadratic equation? How can I tell just by glancing at an equation that's a quadratic? Does anybody know? In other words, how do I know that A is a quadratic? It's got a squared. That's what makes a quadratic a quadratic. Oh, that also means that when you graph it, it will be a parabola. You learned that in Math 11 last year. So how do you solve a quadratic equation? Why can't we just get the t by itself? No, two of them. So what's step 0? Before you even start to solve a quadratic, what's step 0? And here's your hint. Step 0. That's why I call it step 0. Got to make it equal to 0. I think the easiest here, I'm going to plus the 2 over. You may be tempted to skip this step and think, oh, I can do it in my head without rewriting it. I found I make dumb mistakes then. So even if I have my quadratic solver, I will rewrite it and make it equal to 0. Every time I've tried tracking it all up here without rewriting it, I've put the wrong stuff in. So how do we solve this? Well, in grade 11, one method you learned was the factoring method. But I'm not going to bother covering factoring because most of the time, the numbers that we'll be dealing with won't factor. This one actually will, and I'll show you how I know in just a second. So we're going to solve this with the quadratic formula. What is the quadratic formula? X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Did your Math 11 teacher make you memorize that last year? I always made my kids memorize it. Okay? Hey, on your formula sheet, purple or yellow, doesn't matter, purple formula sheet, on the back page, near where there's a picture of a little triangle, did I give you the quadratic formula? So you can memorize it or it's there. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Can you say it faster than that? Can you say it backwards? a2 overall. C a4 minus square b root square minus plus b negative equals x. I love the quadratic formula. When I used to teach math mansioned, I would tell kids that the quadratic formula was like Shakespearean iambic pentameter poetry for mathematics. It was as close as we come. And the reason is the quadratic formula is unique. It will solve any squared equation. We've known about the quadratic formula for at least 500 years. But after we found the quadratic formula, mathematicians asked the next logical question, is there a cubic formula that will solve any x cubed equation? Is there a quartic formula that will solve any x to the... Is there a Sauron Ring of Power one formula to rule them all formula that will solve any polynomial equation? And it was only about 120 years ago that a mathematician proved you cannot. There is not. The quadratic formula is unique. There is no higher order formula that will solve cubics or quartics or anything. So, and the backwards thing, I live for the day when a police officer pulls me over and said, Mr. Dewick, I'm going to give you a warning if you can tell me the quadratic formula backwards. It could happen. I can dream. No? Okay. Oh, I said x equals, what variable do we have here actually? So I'm going to write, and I would encourage you all to, t equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I write down the generic version. And you can copy it from here, but I'd encourage you copy it from your formula sheet so you get used to looking in the right place, because you won't have this in front of you on a quiz or a test. Make sure you know where it is. And then don't write this next bit down. You might have had a teacher that said, okay, now you need to write what A is, 5, what B is, 7, and what C is. Have I ever told you that I'm lazy but organized? Did I use that phrase once or twice last year? So here's what I typically do, Mansion. I put an A above the A, I put a B above the B, I put a C, or underneath. But I think that's enough for me to figure out what's what. And then I carefully substitute things in. Negative b, I guess negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 7 squared minus 4 times 5 times positive 2 all over. Often I'll do the 2a in my head because I can double almost any decimal. So I usually just do that one in my head. You don't have to, it's just me being lazy. Is this a fraction? Yes. Is there more than one thing on the top? So, brackets around the top. Is there more than one thing on the bottom? Brackets around the bottom. There's more. Oh, no, there isn't. If I left it as a 2a, there would be. That's why I doubled it, because I'm lazy. How many of you have the fancy schmancy fraction button, the one that looks like that? I think it's the second or third button down on the left from the top. Use that if you can, and you can type this a lot easier. Those of us that don't, we're going to do something like this, and especially those of us that have TIs. Open up a bracket. Negative 7, I can't do plus or minus, so the first time I do plus. Square root, open a bracket. Those of you that have the fancy Casios, I think when you hit the square root, it actually just extends the line for you, so you don't need to open up a bracket, which is kind of nice. 7 squared minus 4 times 5 times 2. Close off the square root bracket. Close off the top, so 2 closed brackets in a row. Divided by 10. And if you do that, you should get negative 0.4, or you might have got a fraction, then hit your S to D or your change button and turn it into a decimal. If you did not get that, don't hit clear, but raise your hand and call me over and I'll find out where you made your typo. You got that okay, Matt? How can I find the other root or the other x-intercept or the other zero or the other solution? They're all names for the same thing. Well, if you've listened to my advice and if you've got a good calculator, you should be able to backspace and just change the plus sign to a minus sign. And I got -1. Yes? That work? Were you trying the solver, or were you doing it the long way? Okay. Do you have the solver? Okay. So you can try it the long way. I'm going to teach you in a second. Don't clear your calculator then. Pause the video. Let's try another one. B. First of all, what kind of an equation is this? It's a quadratic. How can I glance at this and tell it's a quadratic? It's got a squared. And the reason I'm doing that is, especially for those of you that haven't done pre-calc 12 yet, there's many other types of equations out there, and they all have different strategies to solve them. This one is quadratic. So I'm going to minus the 12t over. I'm going to write it as 0 equals 4.9t squared minus 12t. And then mentioned, what did you say? It does have a c. As a number, exactly what is c. And so if you need to, just so that you know it's 0, you can add the plus 0, but it does have a c. It's just we never write a 0. Okay? So that's A, that's B, that's C. If you have the solver and you want to use your solver, you can. If you have the solver but you want to do this longhand, you can. Those of you that don't have the solver, it's time for our friend, the quadratic formula. T equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. B is -12, so what would -12 be? Yeah, so -b is +12, I'm positive. Plus or minus the square root of -12 squared minus 4 times 4.9. Oh, times 0. I probably could have just skipped that conveniently. All over 2 times 4.9, I think that's 9.8. Hey, I've seen that number before somewhere. Marcella, is this a fraction?
Say yes.
Is there more than one thing on the top?
Say yes.
So brackets around that. Do you have the built-in solver? Oh, you do? Oh, so you're done already? Yes? No? Oh, okay, well, you can use your solver or do it a long way. I don't care. So if I type this into my calculator, sorry? Do you have a calculator here? Okay. Open up a bracket. 12 plus square root of -12 close bracket squared. I have to put the negative in brackets if I'm going to square it. Minus 0. Is that going to change anything? Minus 0 will change something? I'm not going to bother typing it. Close off the square root. Close off the top. That's a lot of brackets. Divided by 9.8. Did you get 2.4489799592?
Got an error.
So don't clear your calculator. I know what your error is, but don't clear it. And then I think if you 0 should be the other root, yes? Oh, typo, Mr. Duick. I deleted it. Oh. So I got 2.45 and 0. And now I shall come around if any of you need help with this one. If you were getting an error, the most common one is if you did this and then went square without brackets. In your head, what's 4 squared? What's 4 times 4? Everybody, what's 4 squared? 4 times 4 is 16. So what would -4 squared be? What's -4 times -4? Because a negative times a negative is a... The problem is your calculator software. You see, if I go 4 squared, it gives me 16. But if I go negative 4 squared, it gives me negative 16 because the software did not know that you wanted it to also square the negative. It only put the squared on the 4. So in here, you were getting 144 negative. You were trying to take the square root of a negative number if you didn't put the squared outside the brackets. Or, look up. This is how I would have typed this in. What's a negative squared? I would have noticed that this negative was going to vanish. And so actually, even though when I handwrite it, I write it like this on my calculator, I just wouldn't have bothered putting the negative in because I know it's going to vanish when I square it anyways. I'm that lazy, but also it cuts down on errors. So I didn't do that this time. If I bring this line back here, really, if I was doing this on my own, I wouldn't have put that negative in, which would let me get rid of that bracket and that bracket, which is just a lot easier to track now, and I still get the same answers. Tricks of the trade. Good, Solve C. What's step 0? Okay. Now, I'm going to show you a habit that I have. Sky, even though it would be easier to plus the 10 over, I have learned that when the squared term is negative, that's when I make the most dumb mistakes. So I have the habit of always making the squared term positive because I'm doing it all in my head anyways. So if you're ever looking at my answer keys, you may say, Mr. Duick, why did you move 2 things over instead of 1 thing over? I was probably trying to make the quadratic term positive. So I would write this as positive 4.9 t squared minus 12t minus 10 equals 0. Try this on your own. I'll do it up here. Let's see if we end up in the same place. If you have the solver, you should be done in about 5 seconds. Good for you. Those of us that don't, and Elias and Kyle, that negative 12 that I wrote in red, I'm not going to bother putting the negative into my calculator because I know it's going to vanish anyways. So I just did that so it kind of stands out. Marcella, is this a fraction? Is there more than one thing on the top? Close off the square root, close off the top, divided by, open up a bracket. And those of you with solvers, was the first root 3.1060294881? No? Am I wrong? And negative 0.657? There. I'll even paste that in here. Well, right now, Physics 12 is Math 11. It's going to get tougher. Yes. Okay, good. I'll be right there. Those of you with a built-in solver, I'm going to plus this to here, plus that to there. So I'm going to solve 0 equals 4.9 t squared minus 4.3 t minus 19. Who's got a solver? Can somebody tell me the roots? We're not going to do this, but I'll leave this in your notes if you want extra practice. But we'll write down what the answers are. What'd you get? Someone with a solver, solve that, please. Oh, hang on, I made a mistake. That should be positive. Ha! Sloppy me. 4.9t squared plus 4.3t minus 19. So that's A, that's B, that's C. What'd you get? 1.58 and negative 2.46. Can I get a confirmation on that with a solver? Yeah? Yep. So those of you that are doing these by hand or with a solver, if you want one more for practice here, although I'm also going to give you a bunch in the homework. Where will we use this? Don't write this down, look up. Last year, when we were dropping objects from cliffs or launching objects from cliffs, I always had to let VI be 0 because that was the only quadratic you could solve. This year, VI is not going to be 0, and so you'll have to solve a full quadratic equation in order to get this. Okay? Hey, formula manipulation. I preached this at you last year, and I was impressed. You all bought into this. You realized, although it was awkward and challenging at first, it was a much better way to learn stuff than trying to memorize things. So, if I tell you that AB squared plus C equals D, get the A by itself. How would you get the A by itself? That's a good question. Well, typically what I did with new equations when I was uncertain is I put a dot or something above the A just to focus on it. What side of the equation is the A on? Left side or right side? So what side is going to drop down like a domino? The other side. Because we're going to move everything over to the other side. What side is the A on? So what side's going to drop down like a domino? First thing I would do is I would drop the D and probably even drop the equal sign down so I've got my two sides of the equation. Armin, have I written something down? Do I feel better? Am I more relaxed? Are you with me? Because I don't know where you were, but I wasn't here. Okay. What's right next to the A?
The B squared.
What's the B squared doing to the A? So? Divide? Remember that. Remember that. What's the C doing to the A? What one am I going to do first? It's reverse BEDMAS. You're adding and subtracting first, and then you're multiplying and dividing. Good, man, Chan. Talk me through. What does A equal? D.
Oh.
Minus C over B squared. Sure. Okay. Remember doing that? Seemed weird at first, but I was really impressed. You all bought into it. So much better. We'll be really flogging that this year as well. How would I get the T by itself for D equals VIT plus a half AT squared? If VI was 0, we did this last year. If VI is 0, we got D equals, and you could either write it as AT squared over 2, or some of you like to write it as 0.5 AT squared. Some of you made the 1/2 into a decimal, 0.5, or you left it as a fraction. Mr. Dewick, what happened to the 1/2 on the left? Look up, look up, look up. It's always there. It is 1/2, but does timesing by 1 make a difference at all? Then Paige, you can't make me write that 1. That is 1/2 AT squared, but that looks prettier. Paige, what am I trying to get by itself? Psst, look up. Yeah, very good. Oh, Mr. Dewick has a new toy. Green laser. Ooh. Okay. I have that too. How would I get the T by itself? What's the A doing, Paige? First of all, what side is the T on? So the left side drops down like a domino. How will I move the a over? What's the a doing to the t? Adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing? So, what's the opposite of timesing by a? Yes, coming back to you now, right? What's the 2 doing to the t squared? So, that gives me a t squared. T what? Squared. How to get rid of a squared? So that was one of our equations for getting the t by itself. When vi was 0, what if vi isn't 0? Quadratic formula. Jordana, what if I wanted to get this blue version by itself? How would I get the t squared? Oh, I guess the d would drop down like a domino. What's the 0.5 and the a doing to the t squared? So that equals t squared. T what? Squared. And this is where I tried to let you know or remind you that dividing by 0.5, timesing by 2 do the same mathematical operation. Those are identical equations. Look different, but they're the same. One more. C. C. Alex, what am I trying to get in part C? Where is the E right now? On the... Ugh. Wait a minute. Dividing by E on the right-hand side, what's that the same as doing on the left-hand side? So are you telling me that that's the same equation? Yep. By the way, we can't ever deal with stuff when they're in the bottom of a fraction. If what we want to get by itself is in the bottom of a fraction, my first job is going to be get it to the top somehow, and this is the easiest way. Okay, so now the E is on the left. How will I move the A squared over? How will I move the BC over? So can you tell me what E equals? Oh, someone's working ahead? That's okay. Or most of us would go alphabetical because we're organized and call it BCD, but that's okay. All over. Can I show you a handy dandy schmandy hint? Everybody look up. Anytime that you have one fraction equals one fraction with no plus signs or minus signs, you can move stuff diagonally. So if I was doing example C in my head, I would just be moving stuff back and forth. So for example, if you want me to get the letter C by itself, the C would move to the top on the right, the A squared would stay where it was, the B would stay where it was, the E would move over that way, and the D would move down there, and that's the C by itself. That's just me with a vengeance, harsh, moving the stuff diagonally. There's going to be an equation that I hope to get to. This is the orbital mechanics equation. It looks like this. Big G, big M, little m over r squared equals little m 4 pi squared r over t squared. That's the equation that can tell you how high an object needs to be in orbit, or how fast it needs to be moving in orbit, or what its orbital period is. But really, Elias, it's one fraction equals one fraction, and it's nice if you can glance at it and just rewrite it. In fact, I gave you this equation in your homework today. You'll have to rewrite it. Oh, and there's an m in everything. The little m would cancel, it turns out. So today, the homework is going to be every question. If I get to the whole lesson, I don't know if I will or not. Let's get tricky with it. Tricky. That's funny. It's the humor you're going to get, Kai. Hey, remember in your prime how good you were at formula manipulation last year? I want you to get that good at trig. And what I mean by that is my goal within a couple of lessons is you're at the point where you can do all of the trig without writing anything down, just going to your calculator, or maybe writing down one line. And that's what I want to challenge you to get to. On a test, will I show more work? Oh, heck yeah. But in my homework, will I try and see if I can become an expert and do it in as few steps of writing as possible? Knock yourself out, that's the goal. we're going to have two primary tools for trig. Pythagoras and right-angled trig, Sohcahtoa. Whenever you need to go, that's fine, kiddo. Okay? There is also the sine law and the cosine law, which work when there isn't right angles. And if you were once good at the sine law and the cosine law, hit me up during a blended session and I will show you how to use them. But we can survive this course just fine by getting really good at Pythagoras and Sohcahtoa. You may remember that acronym. So, example 1 says, find the length of the missing side. How many sides did they give me? 2, and they want me to find the third. In order to do this, we're going to use Pythagoras. Pythagoras' theorem. This may be the oldest equation in history. It's well over 2,500 years old. It was not discovered by Pythagoras. It's just named after him. Pythagoras was a Greek mathematician who lived around 300 BCE, give or take. What is Pythagoras' theorem? This is one often kids have memorized because it's kind of nicely alphabetical. What's Pythagoras? And I did not put it on your formula sheet, so this is also my way of saying you could add it to your purple sheet if you wanted to, but you do need to memorize this one. What's Pythagoras? A squared. What is it? I think asking you to remember ABC is fair game. Oh, but there is one caveat, one restriction. What always has to go where the C is? What always has to go there? The what? Hypotenuse. Yeah. So the X doesn't always go there. The long diagonal side always goes there. As long as you remember that, it's straightforward. Okay? So what's the equation that I would get from this triangle? What squared plus what squared equals what squared? Naomi. Oh, I thought I heard you saying it. Sorry. Sorry? It's Angeli. I did Naomi because, geez, dumb. Ange. Terrible. That's going to happen once or twice until my brain shuffles over. Ange. What's the? Did you have the equation?
Oh, I was writing it down.
Oh. Okay. What's the equation? Just tell me what to write. What squared plus what squared equals what squared? 55 squared plus x squared equals, or you could have gone x squared plus 55 squared equals 73 squared. The 73 is the one you got to get in the right place. Stop. Am I lazy but organized? Have I written down one line of work? Let's see if I can finish it from this. How would I get the x squared by itself? Everybody cross that out and go minus 55 squared. That's an x squared by itself. How would I get rid of said squared? So I'm going to go to my calculator and I'm just going to go 73 squared minus 55 squared equals square root answer button. This might work out evenly. Usually they won't because I don't care enough to make them work out evenly, but I think this one does. What do you get? My homeroom number? Yes? 48? Okay. Units. Centimeters. So I will take marks off for no units on a test, right? Or wrong units. Does that work okay? Good. Try doing example 2 on your own. This one won't work out evenly. So Elias, I wrote x squared plus 7.6 squared equals 19.3 squared. And then I went 19.3 squared minus 7.6 squared equals square root equals. To be perfectly honest, my hope is that in your homework, you can glance at this and go straight to this answer without writing anything down. If you can get there, I free you up to do that. If you got to write a line or two, that's fine as well. So one of the tools that we'll use quite often is Pythagoras. The other tool we'll use is right-angle trigonometry. First, you learned, hopefully in grade 10, and I hope you reviewed it last year, that when you label a right-angle triangle, there are three sides. They are opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. First of all, theta is down in the bottom left. I usually go color, 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 color. Helps me figure out where we are. This horizontal side here, opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse. This side here. How do I know? Someone said opposite. They're right. How do I know? Well, right now, Paige and I are sitting opposite each other, facing each other, across from each other. Across from your angle is opposite. It would be nice if the word across started with an O instead of an A, but opposite from your angle is opposite. Put an O there. What's this vertical side? Isn't this side adjacent as well? Okay, the long diagonal side is always the hypotenuse. What does the word adjacent mean? Beside? Right now, Jordana and Marcella are adjacent to each other. So beside each other, this is adjacent. You need to be able to label, Davis, you need to be able to label the three sides. Oh, and please be aware, if I change to this angle up here, this would be opposite and that would be adjacent, but the hypotenuse would not move. So you need to be able to label sides opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. We also have three primary trig ratios. What are they called? They're buttons on your calculator. Mention? Sine, abbreviated SIN. Cosine, abbreviated COS. And tangent, abbreviated TAN. There are also three reciprocal trig ratios: secant, cosecant, and cotangent. We don't use them much in physics. They're kind of redundant. In fact, you may notice you don't have a secant or a cosecant or a cotangent button on your calculator. They're nice, but eh. So, one of the things that you can do on your calculator is if I give you an angle in degrees, your calculator can tell you the sine or the cosine or the tangent. Can all of you right now find the sine of 42 degrees? And it's important that every one of you does this on your calculator because some of your calculators might be in the wrong mode. You should get 0.66913060064. If you don't, you're in the wrong mode. I've been in the wrong mode for a while, Mr. No, I mean in calculator-wise. Anybody not get that? Who's got the graphing calculators? Okay. Just be aware, Dave, you normally have one as well. If you ever reset your calculator, by default, it will probably reset to radians, not degrees. So if you're ever getting like nonsense answers, first thing you want to check if you're doing any trig, go look. Make sure you're in the right mode. Can you all find the answer to B and C and D? One of these will give you a weird answer. Yep. For D? What'd you get for B?
B?
Yeah.
0.2419.
Is that rounded off properly? And I know tangent of 45, that one I happen to have memorized. It's 1. I know a 45-degree angle is a slope of 1, tangent of 1. By the way, tangent is also the slope on a graph. Hashtag nerd trivia. Which also means it's technically a derivative. Yes? What'd you get for tan 90?
Error.
Really? What's the tangent of 89?
Tangent of 89 is 57.
What's the tangent of 89.9? Calculus students were taking the limit and sneaking up on it from left.
172.
What's the tangent of 89 point and then 4 nines after the decimal? So 89.9999.
A big number.
We're getting big boys.
So in calculus, we would say the limit as theta approaches 90 of tangent of theta is infinity. Here you get an error, but if you want to, you can poetically put an infinity sign, which is an 8 on its side, which I really have a tough time drawing as a lefty, but you can do that if you want. By the way, why do you get an error? Okay? We can also use our calculators to go backwards. Not only can I give you an angle and say, tell me the sine or the cosine of the tangent, I can give you the sine or the cosine or the tangent, and my calculator can tell me the angle that it came from. Who remembers how you do that on your calculator? Wasn't the reciprocal button? It's the shift or the second function or the inverse. Those are the big three on the different models. It's almost always somewhere near the top left of your calculator keyboard. So if tangent of theta is 3.732, how can I find theta? If I go shift tangent of 3.732, that will tell me the angle that it came from. What is the angle theta that it came from? What did I really start with? I started with 75 and gave you a rounded off answer. So when you go backwards, you get a slightly rounded off original angle. So can you please try doing these three here? Find the angle that the sine or the cosine or the tangent value came from. You're going to use your second function or your inverse or your shift button. Two of these I know. I can do these in my head. I don't know this one. And I got 30, 60, and 25.99, 26. I made these up nice. Usually when you're finding an angle, it won't be nice. It's going to be like 23.25973 degrees. I'm not going to try and contrive examples to make them nice. You okay? I've been talking for a while, I know. Turn the page. Last thing. We learned this acronym called Sohcahtoa. Sohcahtoa. And we memorized that it stands for sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. If we combine that all together, we can now solve right-angled triangles. So let's look at example 6a. It says, determine the length of the indicated side. So let's do this one together. Kyle, look up, my friend. First thing that I would do is I color the angle that they gave me. It just helps me focus on what I'm focusing on. And then I'm going to label the sides that have stuff on them. Folks, that X, opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse. What about that 15? Okay. Now, you may have had a teacher who told you to label all three sides. This is going to be one of the few times when I criticize a colleague and I will say, that's bad teaching. I think right now, how many letters are there? 2. Which trig function has the O and the H in it? Look at the acronym. So which trig function is so? If you put the A on, because I've seen some teachers that say, put all three on, now it's more confusing because now you got 3 letters. Now you have to cross that out in your mind and ignore it. Just don't put it on in the first place. So I label the sides that are not blank, but I leave the blank side blank. Less work and easier. Which trig function? Which trig function? O and H? Which trig function?
Sine.
What always goes...
Tangent.
No. Okay? Sine. O and H. What always goes next to the trig function? The angle. What always goes next to the trig function? The angle. Everybody, what always goes next to the trig function?
The angle.
What always goes next to the trig function?
The angle.
I don't think Min's mouth is moving. What always goes next to the trig function? Everyone?
Angle.
I'm doing that for a reason. Hopefully you've clued in that when I do one of those stupid repetitions, I'm planting a seed for something that's really important later on. What is the angle here, Kyle? Good. Equals, I'm not going to write opposite over hypotenuse. I'm going to write x over. Everybody look up. Technically, this is a fraction. And you might recall that if you have one fraction equals one fraction, stuff can move which way?
Diagonally.
Oh, so are you saying that I could just do, and I've got the x by itself? And can I not bother writing the over 1? Can you just please remember that it's always there, that anything is technically a fraction, because it's always over 1, if nothing else? So x is going to be, what? 15 times the sine of 57, which is? 12.5. So 12.6? If I go to 3 sig figs. Anybody else? 12.6? Now, built-in error check. The most common mistake is kids, instead of multiplying the sine, they might go sine divided by sine 50, or 15 divided by sine 57. Look at the x. Is it longer than the 15 centimeter side or shorter than the 15 centimeter side? So if you get an answer longer than the hypotenuse, you've messed up. I will draw these roughly to scale. So I already glanced at that and said, probably going to be 10, 11, or 12-ish, because that's about how long it looks-ish. So was it 12.6 centimeters? B. Color. That 11.1, opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse? Opposite. That x, which trig function has the O and the A in it? By the way, a good habit, one that I always did, anytime if I was doing trig homework, anytime I turned the page, first thing I did at the top of the page is I wrote out Sohcahtoa. I didn't make you do it for this page because I wrote it out for you in big block letters there at the top of this little page here, but cheap habit. Or on your test, top of the front page, I write out Sohcahtoa. Works easy peasy. Which trig function? What you do in the summer? What always goes next to the trig function, Elias? Ooh, help them out, everybody. What always goes next to the trig function? Everybody, what always goes next to the trig function? What's the angle here, Elias? Good. You know what? Sorry to break it to you, but or not. Opposite over adjacent. Where is the x in this fraction, Elias? On the... wait a minute. Is this one fraction equals one fraction? Stuff moves how? So are you telling me that I can move the x right to there and at the same time move the tan 28 down to there? And now I have the x by itself? Hmm. What do you get? What do you get? 20.9 units?
Centimeters.
Centimeters. And that looks about right. That side looks roughly twice as long as the 11.1 if I kind of eyeball it. So I figured something like 20, 21, 22. Okay. Hey, not only can you find a missing side, you can find a missing angle. So Manchand, you and I are going to find angle X. First thing I'm going to do is go color, 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 color. That's 7, Manchand, opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse. That's why I'm putting pressure on you. You know what? Let's do the 15. What's the 15? Okay. The 7, is it adjacent, beside, or is it opposite, across from, facing? That would be opposite.
Adjacent.
Yep. Which trig function has the a and the h in it? Hey everyone, what always goes next to the trig function? What's the angle here? X. Which is why I planted that seed, so you wouldn't freak out and wonder, what do I... No, the angle goes there, like it always has. That's going to equal adjacent, 7, over hypotenuse, 15. Ooh, how do I find an angle? We did it on the previous page. Oh, second function or shift. Okay, so on my calculator, I'm going to hit my second function, cosine. I'm going to have to open up a bracket. 7 divided by 15 in brackets. And I get 62 degrees. The symbol, Manchand, for angle is a little slanty capital L. Looks like an angle. So angle X equals 62 degrees. One more and then a couple of terms and we're done. Thanks, folks. You've been very patient. We'll get through this whole lesson, which is nice. Otherwise, we're going to be a half class behind the other humans. Hey, Matt, which angle are they asking me to find? Because I asked you to. Which angle are they asking me to find? Because I asked you to. Which angle? Come on, you've missed that joke a little. Okay. Color, 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 color. That 8.1, opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse. What about the 14.5? Which trig function? That's not the trig function. Sine. What always goes next to the trig function? The angle, which in this case, because I asked you to. And that's going to be opposite over hypotenuse, 8.1 over 14.5. How do I find the angle? Second function, or shift. (8.1) divided by 14.5. Matt B, did you get 33? Oh, 34 degrees? Almost done. I want to give you two terms. Angle of elevation and angle of depression. Okay. Angle of elevation, can all of you kind of draw a dotted line as though it's the ground? And then draw a little arrow pointing upwards. And we'll put a little theta right there. That's an angle of elevation. Is that okay? Yeah? Or I'll call you Naomi again. No, okay. For an angle of elevation, you raise your eyes. You start on the ground and you go up. The trickier one is the angle of depression. For an angle of depression, you stand on a cliff. Yeah, we're already starting out in a bad place. Draw a little dotted line straight out like this from the top of the cliff. The angle of depression is this one here. where you lower your eyes because you're all depressed. The reason I point that out is there is going to be a question in your homework that gives you an angle of depression from a cliff, and most kids want to put it there. That goes here. Oh, lost my line. Okay? My angels, what's your homework? Look at number 1, please. If you can do number 1 without writing anything down, purely on your calculator, checking your answers, they're at the back, then I say go ahead. I'll assume you didn't cheat if all I see are answers here. Okay? Number 2, you should be able to do this without showing any work. This is all calculator work. Same with number 3. 4, if you can do it in one line, or if you can reach the point where you can do Sohcahtoa trig by only labeling the triangle opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse, and then doing the rest, Sam, on your calculator, showing no work, I'm fine with that. How I do it when I'm making up my answer keys. I would never do it that way on a test, but I'll assume you're smart enough on a test or a quiz to show more work. Okay? Your homework here is every question, and the answers are attached on the end. I will normally try not to give you homework on the weekend, but you all have tomorrow afternoon off, so I'm not feeling too guilty.